Okay, so I just pressed record, so it's recording. All right. Do you have allergies at all?
A little bit. Not too bad.
My allergies are, I'd never had allergies till we moved here to Rome, and now every time I walk outside, I blow up. Okay,
Well, maybe it's because I grew up in Rome. They don't affect me.
that's true. That could be. That could be. All right. Okay, let's begin. All right. All right. Good morning, and nope, it's not morning. Sorry, we're going to have to cut that. Okay. All right. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Seven Hills Fellowship Tuesday devotional. For those of you who have been tuning into these over the last couple of months, you'll know that initially I started off by talking about some of the lessons that God began teaching me through my diagnosis with cancer. And then a couple of weeks ago, we changed the format where we started interviewing people in our church who also had gone through some forms of suffering. And in particular, what I wanted to hear from them was how God sustained them and how he encouraged them in the midst of their suffering. And so today we've got Jessica Minton with us. And so Jessica, if you don't mind, let me turn this over to you. And I'd love to hear your story about who you are and a little bit about your suffering, but then how God really was present with you in the midst of your suffering. So let me turn it over
to you. My name is Jessica Minton. I grew up here in Rome. I am married to Bryant Minton, and we have one child, Grant. And I met Bryant at Jacksonville State University, and then I ended up transferring to Alabama. But my life has been interesting. My life hasn't been easy. It's been very full of suffering. I don't really know how to word that except that way. But I know that God put me here. And I don't necessarily know why. When I was 11, I had cancer. I had an osteosarcoma in my left tibia. And, it's kind of weird the way I ended up finding it. But, it's observant middle school PE teacher, that said, "Hey, you were limping." I'm like, "My leg doesn't hurt. I'm not limping." And people at church had mentioned it to my mom, just little things. And so anyway, we had planned to go to the doctor, and we went, and they found something on the bone. By Wednesday, we went to the doctor, and he was like, "It's a tumor," to a doctor in Atlanta, an orthopedist in Atlanta. And then so I had cancer. And during that year, though, my dad died of an aneurysm. My house was hit by a tornado. It was just thing after thing that year. And I thought, "Oh, God, this is hard. This has been the hardest thing ever." But that's not really where it ended. That I've had so much other stuff that has affected me since then. A lot of it from the chemo that I received when I was 11. So we had Grant. He's 13. In September of 2006, and I had him C-section, which is a good thing, because 3 months later I had a massive stroke. Which he was in the NICU for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, 6 weeks in Scottish Rite and a week here at Floyd. And during that time, I kind of saw what my mom went through, I guess, with having to be in the hospital with me, just being torn and not knowing what to do. It was a little different because I couldn't spend the night in the NICU with him, but it's very different experience in that respect, being a parent and seeing your child go through stuff. And then I had a stroke in December of 2006. Basically my heart wasn't working right. It's kind of funny because hindsight's 2020, so if I was to look back at all the things that happened during my pregnancy, I probably could have prevented it, but who knows? But so, that was hard. I don't remember a lot of it. My husband remembers more of it than I do, at least the first, week or so. And he has a very different perspective too. But for me, because I'd already been through suffering, because, I thought this was the worst thing ever, with being, having cancer and losing my dad and our house getting hit by a tornado, like I thought was the worst. And then, God gave me more. I didn't ever think I would have any more of this kind of stuff. But I kind of realized that that every time I struggled, every time I had anything going on in my life, that God was always there. He was always supporting me, always supporting our family. And it's been, I guess it's funny because some of the hardest things is still stuff with Grant. He was life flighted 4 years ago for asthma attack, and that was the scariest night of my life. But it's not the same. I was like, I was in the hospital when my heart was only working 15%. But for me, that wasn't scary. I'm sure for my husband it was, but not for me. But, seeing my child suffer, I think, is harder than anything else. But it's our lives have been interesting. That's where I'll leave that one. But
yeah. Like, can I interrupt for a second?
Yep.
And just say, first of all, it's almost unfathomable that you would have that much suffering to deal with. I mean, it really is. I mean, as an outsider hearing that, and especially as an 11-year-old girl, to have all those things happen. So often suffering will make people bitter, or drive them away from God, or suffering does exactly the opposite and makes them grateful and pushes them towards God. And somehow you're in that second category. How in the world did that happen?
Part of it, I think, I became a Christian at 6, which was young. I don't think I didn't really ever understand, I don't know, but I didn't necessarily totally understand, but I understood what sin was, understood that Jesus had died for me. And so I accepted him. And I think because of that, I had a dad that loved the Lord, and, just hearing his stories and, being encouraged by that helped me. I remember that it's kind of funny because I had a biopsy on Friday, excuse me, and I was supposed to go back on Monday to find out if it was cancer or not. And so, but, so I was like, I'm sure it's not, I went through a weekend of, I'm sure it's not cancer, well, my dad and my mom knew the night before because it was just called Eggleston Children's Hospital at that time, had called to confirm an appointment.
Wow.
And so they knew the night before. So they knew it was coming. They haven't been told it, but they knew because, he had told them, if this is cancer, you'll have to go see the oncologist. And so, the next day at the doctor's appointment, when they told us, the one thing I remember my dad saying was, God will get us through this. God will be here. And I don't, that I've always felt his nearness. And I've always wanted to just share that God is always right here.
Yeah. Let me do this. The audience listening may not know this, but we try to keep these at 10 minutes so we can actually post them on Instagram. So we've got about a minute left, which is just terrible, unfair. We will literally, let's do this again 2 or 3 more times. But let me wrap this up by asking this. That idea of God's nearness, were there ever particular scriptures or a particular passage of scripture that really stood out to you and confirmed God's nearness to you in the midst of that suffering, whether it was suffering with your own things or suffering with Grant, any verses or passages of scripture that really stood out to you?
Well, it's not necessarily about his nearness, but this is kind of the verse that I leaned on was James 1, 2 through 4. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let the endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And so, I know that God is there and that he is perfecting me, that I'll never be perfect until I get to heaven. But that's what he's doing. He is trying to align me to where I'm supposed to be, I guess.
Yeah. I tell you, people that haven't suffered might have a hard time understanding that, but it is interesting when our little story is somehow being woven into God's larger story so that our smaller story actually has meaning and purpose. Boy, that's so encouraging. And you just wouldn't know it unless you'd been through it, for sure. Okay, I've got to stop us because we're right at 10 minutes. Let's do this 3 or 4 more times. Okay. Hey, Jessica, thank you very much. Again, Jessica Minton, everybody. Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm going to pause this and we'll chat a little bit more, but we're going to do this again before too long. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.